If we could, we might as well just start by sitting them down and we'll introduce them one by one. How many do we have? We have 4, or do we? 4, okay. Karen, too, yeah. Anyway, thank you, and I want to thank, just make a little bit of time to thank Robin and Lynn for all of this and all the hard work they've done to get this all together, and they've done such a great job. My name is Jon Duncanson. As many of you know, I invented the internet. And as you also know, to my dismay, I failed to monetize it. I had this idea that the internet should be free. And who could ever think of such a thing? But really what we are talking about today is monetizing technology. We've got entrepreneurs here. We've got people from multinational corporations. And there's nothing that's crass capitalistic about this. What we're talking about is building platforms. That takes money. And on top of those platforms, new ideas can take form and information can reach the public. And so we've got a great panel here. You just saw Bruce Boren of Televisa, which is basically the 500-pound gorilla of television in Latin America. You have Karen Richardson, who has been there from the start. Netscape, she's done funding. She's been big in sales in Silicon Valley, and she is now on the board of BritishTelecom. We have Marcus Dantus, who's the director of Wayra in Mexico, Telefonica's startup accelerator. It's the largest high-tech incubator accelerator in the world right now. And we have Miguel Mier, COO of Cinepolis. And Cinepolis is a great company, started out with about 500 screens in Mexico, and they've graduated to about over 3,000 screens across 12 countries. So if you want to sit down, we'll have a little conversation here. And I think what we want to do here, since it's close to lunchtime, is make this almost like a dinner conversation. So it's very free-formed. Everyone can speak up as they want to. And if DC is in the house, he can provide some tequila for the people who might need it as an appetizer. But what I want to go to here, and Bruce touched on it a little bit, and everyone else has touched on it, what strikes me is a little bit of the dichotomy. What you have here, many of the people in the room, either funders, they are entrepreneurs, and then what we have are multinationals. And traditionally, I think from the start, let's say the start of the internet as we know it came about in the early 90s. What you had was a group of people, young people, starting ideas, and what you had were multinationals who already had the money. They didn't need funding, and they were late starters. Television in the United States was, which I know intimately, was making so much money it was a license to print money. The internet came upon the markets in the United States, and television was very late to get in the game. Big companies tend to have an infrastructure that's a little more lumbering than a fast and quick startup. So, Karen, if you want to start out, what did you see in the beginning in terms of that kind of dichotomy, and where do you see it going with multinational companies right now?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I've spent my whole career in the Silicon Valley working in principally startups, right? So I have a keen perception of how the little guy, the gorilla, can come out there and trump the big competitors in industries, whether they be, again, my early days at Netscape, et cetera. And it's absolutely true that young, innovative companies can be disruptive, can disrupt existing whole industries, see music, see television, et cetera. But that should not be a call to complacency for the large multinational or mid-sized multinational corporation. And the reason why is because, number one, you'll be dead if you get complacent. And number two, there's no reason why a large, very complex company cannot foster entrepreneurship, creative thinking, and incubate ideas just like small startups do. And I'll give a couple examples. I mean, Bruce can certainly talk about Televisa, which I've had some experience with and does amazingly innovative things for a large company. I'm on the board, as you mentioned, of BritishTelecom. This is the largest telecommunications company, one of them in the world, certainly in the UK and in Europe, 100,000 employees. And yet you see a company like that fostering really creative ideas. Well, how do they do that? I'm going to go back to the comments that were made earlier today, which is I think even in a large company, it comes down to people. It comes down to people and leadership, mentorship, if you will, of going out looking for creative and interesting ideas that can take your businesses forward, even though you're running, say a big existing business. That's number one. And number two, Tom said it from Rally, and that's a huge one, which is courage. Because even when you're running British Telecom or Televisa or name your company, Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, I mean, you've got to have, when you're running a big complex business, you've got to have courage to go after the next big idea, to cannibalize maybe an existing business that you have, and to go forward. And that is something that I think serves not only the entrepreneur well, but it serves you well when you're running a 10, a 20, a $50 billion company.
And when you have those companies of those kinds of sizes, obviously you have the employees that go with it, you have the bureaucracy that go with it. Can any of you, maybe you can speak to this, Bruce, can you turn on a dime? Can you, as a startup, they might start up doing one industry, realizing that the market's not there, and say, okay, now we're going to take a left turn and go somewhere else. How do you, as a large corporation, turn on a dime?
Well, I mean, I think you need to redefine how you turn on a dime when you're a big corporation. So I think one of the things we've tried to do is just that. You watch that sort of ecosphere worldwide. You obviously look beyond your current marketplace and your current core business, and you see how all of those changes that are taking place through new startups, new ways to watch your existing sort of legacy type system business that you have. And if you watch that and you pay attention to that, and you obviously have the right team, which was what we were saying here, I think you can turn on a dime, And I think companies like Televisa, there's a lot of other companies that have shown this, have done that. And you either do that through your innovating your own processes, or you go out and you acquire or you partner up with some of these new companies that are doing that. And I think that's been key for companies like ours.
So in a case like movie theaters, Miguel, which is a traditional, people come in, they pay their pesos or they pay their dollars, they sit down in a large theater. How do you compete with handheld devices and movies on demand?
Well, I think that the way that you started your question about talking about the dichotomy is exactly what we could be an example of, or what we could be the illustration of it. Movies are out there as an entertainment form even before television. And even our grandfather used to go to movie theaters, and we are a brick and mortar company, privately owned, family held, based in Morelia, Michoacan, Mexico. This doesn't sound like a checklist for a very innovative or tech-oriented company, and yet we try to be, or try to have the same DNA for producing innovation that will foster our customers' experience. And having all of the other technology entertainment offerings that are out there, yet Cinepolis and the movie theater industry is still having a sustained and steady business, and in some cases there are some companies like us that are taking market in different countries, and that's what I will talk a little bit more about after lunch, but mainly is to have a setup that fosters innovation. And
But what does that mean? I mean, what is a setup that fosters innovation?
Okay, so first, I think you need to get a framework that helps the whole company to think differently. Going back to Silicon Valley and going back to Stanford, we like Dave Kelly's and IDEO's design thinking philosophy, and we've embraced it for the past decade, and we've tried to do things within the company that will foster innovation in different layers. We have 18,000 Cinepolites employees, and we try to do constantly contests for them to provide new ideas for old products like popcorn. And what could be older than popcorn and a movie in a movie theater? But yet, we try to innovate in those. And so that setup that fosters innovation and that makes people think that they can fail. I mean, the acceptance of failure would be the main thing that could make your 18,000 employees think differently, provide new ideas. And my last thought on that and about design thinking would be testing, doing pilots, being able to bring different innovative ideas, but testing them in an expensive way, that when pilots are successful, building them up, scaling them up, that would be also another area where we believe truly that fostering those ideas would make our company to be a little bit more competitive.
If I could, can I just add
Please,
a quick thought to that? I mean, as a user of his product, I think what they've done is they've created a destination and experience. It's not just going to see a movie. It's going and having an experience, and you get the fantastic chairs, and you can get the popcorn with the caramel. I mean, it's this whole experience that my kids, they want to go and see the new movie. They can also see that and wait a month, and they could see it on all these new platforms.
For your kids, that's something different.
For my kids and for myself.
Yeah, but it's something different. They're used to being on a handheld device, and boy, a movie theater.
Yeah, and what they've done is that they've been so innovative in having the people feel like they're going to have an experience when they go to the movies, not just watch the movie, but actually go to the Cinepolis and wherever and see this.
Sure, interesting. So I want Marcus to weigh in on this as well. But all of you can address this. You're all familiar with Mexico. There is an argument, I think, that could be made that the competitiveness level in each industry probably isn't as high as it is in some other free market societies. And there are a lot of oligarchical setups that really limit competition. So in that context, can the entrepreneur do business with the multinational, or is the multinational the only game in town? I mean, we've heard from some entrepreneurs in Mexico, but we've also heard that it's really tough. I was doing business with a company in Australia called Atlassian, an amazing business software company. Privately held, they're going to be going public. But talking to the founders there, but these two guys are 30 years old and they're the wealthiest guys in Australia. And they said to me directly, there's no sense in Australia to go into computer science because there's no place to go. Their company is it. They really can't get to the United States, so they're like, it's a useless degree. So how do entrepreneurs and you all bridge the gap?
Well, let me first start with a disclaimer. Even though I work for Telefonica, I'm more on the entrepreneurial side.
Sure.
And I'm looking at it from the corporate side.
Sure.
So first of all, let me just address the courage part, because I think that's important. In the case of Telefonica, I think that these people had the courage to accept that they couldn't innovate and to create an environment where innovation could come from external sources. And that's the case of Wayra. In the case of Wayra, what we're doing is we tap into innovation through entrepreneurs that could eventually become part of Telefonica's offering. And in that regard, attack the market. Now, how do entrepreneurs deal with corporations? Going back to your second question, I think, and at least in our case, the most important job we have is to shield entrepreneurs from the processes, from the corporation. I always said it's like a bunch of rabbits running in between elephants. And we really don't want to hit to get the elephant to step on the entrepreneurs.
Because the elephant can bury the entrepreneurs very easily.
Very easily.
Absorb them, bury them,
and
move
it
on.
often does. And I think that the main thing that we need to do is to create this layer of protection between the processes, because that's the eternal dilemma of an entrepreneur. As the company grows, you have to put processes in, and that kind of goes against creativity and innovation. And how do you do it? I believe, companies like Google do it very well, in the sense that they generate this intrapreneurship within the company that keeps on motivating people in the company to generate innovation. And I think that's a good model to follow, but we always have to keep in mind that we need to protect the entrepreneurs and protect the innovation in order to foster it.
Karen, I mean, so what happens in the process of scaling? Let's say you're Google and you're 2 or 3 guys, and within a few years you're one of the largest corporations in the world. What is the process internally, and what are the hurdles?
Yeah, so and I'll specifically talk a little bit about Mexico. One of the challenges that we have in Mexico is, number one, you referred to monopolies or semi-monopolies in certain industries in this country. The second thing that we have is a multi-tiered distribution system. We were talking about this last night with the undersecretary, my husband and I were. The fact that to buy any product oftentimes has to go through multiple multiple tiers of distribution, everybody taking a slice of the pie. By the time it gets to the end person, let's say myself, I'm starting a small company, I'm buying goods and services, I've paid a lot more than I would pay in the US for the same thing if I just drove down to Costco and bought a PC and then I went here and there and whatever. Those are inhibitors, no question, in this country to doing the same kinds of things that you can do in the United States and in other countries. And I think that it's incumbent upon influential people in Mexico, including in the government and regulators, to deal with some of these issues, to create a frictionless environment for startups to happen. So that's kind of, in my view, some of the negatives we have to overcome. On the positive side, and when he's here later today in the panel, you might want to ask him this question because he's got a great answer. David Weekley, when he's an entrepreneur from Silicon Valley, and when he decided to work in Mexico, he chose Mexico because he saw some very critical things about your talent pool. I won't steal his thunder. So I'll let him tell you about that this afternoon. But I think on the positive side, what I would say is that we have the opportunity now in technology in countries like Mexico with a talent pool of engineers to build companies that require very little capital to get started. And that's true in software applications, in mobile applications, in cloud-based applications, because rather than build a building, have to buy lots and lots of expensive stuff, you can actually build a mobile application very inexpensively with very little capital, with a few people sitting in a room. And so I think this new hyperweb that Mike called it this morning, the hyperweb, et cetera, is going to be conducive to countries like Mexico hitting a new accelerator. So I'm actually quite optimistic. But back to my first point, I do think there's a role for influential people in Mexico to try to help get over some of those initial hurdles, because if you're trying to start a business that does have large capital requirements, it's just going to be harder in this country than it is in other places.
And how do you overcome that in Mexico? How do you lobby? Do you talk to government agencies? I mean, how does that happen?
Well, I think I think to some degree it happens because government does get involved. I'm not the best to answer about how it might happen in Mexico.
Well, I really want to know, feet on the ground, how does it happen? How does Televisa go about saying, boy, there are these obstacles to us accelerating our own business, or how do we how do some of these roadblocks go away? And let's face it. I mean, Televisa has a political aspect to it too. If you watched the last, election in Mexico, there was the impression that Televisa supported one side, and there were others that had a little bit of a problem with that. So how do you work within the governmental system to deal with that?
Did we have an election in Mexico? I think necessity is the mother of invention for us. I mean, I think internally we adapt what we're doing in our business model as we see those entrepreneurs and those new businesses coming into the country. And really, we don't see Mexico or even, I would say, North America as our market. We look at the rest of the world. So as we see the Netflixes and as we see all these nonlinear services coming in to compete with us, they also become our customers. So we basically, we just adapt and we watch and we pay attention and we don't ignore anybody. And I think at the end of the day, those political issues that you're talking about, I mean, they get resolved. You know, we just keep on keeping on, I think is the word. So we use those philosophies internally so we don't get involved in that kind of stuff.
And in terms of movie theaters, in trying to compete, do you go to on-demand? Are you able to control some or create some markets for on-demand apps, that kind of thing, that have your branding that you can monetize?
Well, on demand, we are starting a test for next year where we will try to also provide entertainment, provide movies into home entertainment. But before I go there, let me go back to your previous question about dealing with stumbling blocks on the road. And that I think that entrepreneurs find their way to get out of those stumbling blocks. We're seeing that when we're entering to different markets because you might think that once you have your business model right, then you can go to different countries and do it exactly the same and it will work. And it just doesn't happen that way. And you're finding different conflicts and problems. Some are governmental, some are not, some are in the market structure. And you have to deal with those and get your way around in order to make your business successful. You were talking about Mexico being less competitive than other markets or even the US. And in our market, Mexico is a much more competitive environment than the US in exhibition of movies. In the US, there's this radius around every big cinema that doesn't allow other smaller theaters to get the opening movie. So you have these circles where you cannot enter into those pockets of population, and we don't find those circles in any other of the 11 markets where we operate. So I think it's in a case-by-case basis, in an industry basis. In general, probably you're right, that there are a lot more stumbling blocks in Mexico for competition, but there are cases where Mexico is more open, and the entrepreneurial blood is the same DNA that deals with problems in Mexico, in Brazil, in India, and in the US.
I guess part of my question too on this is because we've seen kind of a paradigm shift in the last generation. I have to say that my son, who's 10 years old, never watches TV. Okay, I don't watch television, and I was in television for 20 years. I don't have a telephone in my home. I use a mobile phone. And when I really want to talk to someone, I Skype. I don't use the traditional kinds of communication methods because it's all changing and it's all evolving. And I guess my question to you is, as established corporations and entities that have the money, you don't need the funding, what's the perspective? Are you looking at the upstarts coming and fending them off? And let's face it, I mean, I know people who have started companies and had them just swallowed up. They became very wealthy, my friends, but the companies went away. And because it was just, whether it was easier, I don't know, you're going to tell me the answer, I hope, but whether it was the bureaucracy, it just got lost in it. But how do you view the changes that some of these people are making that could threaten the companies that you're involved with?
Yeah, I think we all could make an interesting comment about that, just representing what you have here: cinemas, television, and telephony. So let me just give a couple perspectives from the BritishTelecom perspective. So we're one of the oldest phone companies in the world. Obviously, a lot of our revenues come from fixed line phone service, which you just mentioned you don't have in your home. So you can imagine that a company that's 30 billion, close to 30 billion US dollars in revenue has to worry about what's happening when people stop using their fixed line phone and start using more mobile or Skype or anything else. So first and foremost, if you're in any old line business that's going to watch a secular decline, number one is you just have to be very forward thinking. You have to understand what secular decline you're facing, because the medium that you're dealing with, most of your revenues are coming from, in our case, fixed line telephony, is going to decline. Okay, fine. And in our case, in BT, we're also regulated. So we have a regulated business where the prices are controlled by the government. So that's fine. We just plan that out. We know what the secular decline is. We can plot fixed line minutes declining. We know where they're declining both in personal usage and in business usage. But we also know what's increasing. Wi-Fi, mobile devices. We're not in the mobile business, but we're in the Wi-Fi business. We also know that businesses rely on fixed lines, emergency lines rely on fixed lines, hospitals rely on fixed line telephony. And so we have a business in addition to a consumer business. And we can look at all those businesses and we can plan 5, 10, 15 years out. We also are in the content business, the television business, the TV rights business. And so if you look at all the businesses that we're in, it's a portfolio of businesses where we're looking out 1, 10, 5, 15 years and seeing where trends are going and then augmenting our R&D strategies, our business strategies, our partnering strategies to look for new opportunities for how communications is happening. Because at the end of the day, we're a phone company, but we're a communications company. So that's maybe a hopefully not too long of an answer about how you take what people would think of as, oh, geez, isn't the phone business a dead business? And say, no, no, no. It's more complex than that. And I would argue that there are a lot of quote, old line businesses, whether you're talking about television or yeah, there's secular declines in pieces of it, but they don't go away overnight. And, there's a way to thread that needle if you do it successfully.
Just to complete that answer, I mean, I completely agree with you. I think looking at tendencies ahead of time, especially because of the slow reaction time of a large corporation, as things commoditize, you really have to start looking at what's coming next.
Young people coming out of Stanford or MIT, given the examples that we had this morning, are not saying, I want to go work for Microsoft. It's not on their radar.
Well, it is about that. It is, well, again, Mexico it's a completely different animal. Specifically in Mexico, the culture shift has just begun towards entrepreneurship. And I think that corporations are going to lose a lot of talent to entrepreneurs. Ricardo mentioned today, and I've always said, it wasn't cool to be an entrepreneur before. Now it is.
Now it is, completely.
So we're going to ride this wave. But that's going to affect corporations. And I think one crucial element of this, it's not just to plan ahead, but it's also to explain to the rest of the company and every single person in the company that you are not about just, in the case of Telefonica, mobile phones, that you are about communication, that you are about innovation, for example. And it's not just saying it, it's actually making people believe that and creating that entrepreneurship.
And make it happening through the bureaucracy.
Exactly.
I guess, and to clarify my question, I would like to be a fly on the wall of the boardroom as a new hot startup that is going to cause your business to have to do somersaults to try to compete. I'd like to see what the conversation is like. Are those conversations in existence? And if they aren't, why aren't they? Because it's more and more a competitive environment, and it seems to me that more and more small companies are being successful and oftentimes are very quickly scaling to become large competitive companies.
So at Televisa they are. I mean, at Televisa, we have the advantage that we're all divided up into operating units, and everybody has their business sort of infrastructure they have to deal with, which is typically a classic business. But at the same time, we have to find a way to react and grow, right? And those growth, I would say, dreams that still exist are very, very aggressive, and the only way to complete those goals is actually to go out and have that sort of your ear to the ground and find out what's coming along, right? And those things that are coming along that are competing with you give you also a window for you to go through and adapt your business model to.
Please.
Well, just building on that answer of forward-looking, I would also say that besides forward-looking, the trend of your own specific industry, we'd like to think about having executives that have a global mindset and understanding that the value of the future is going to be created by entrepreneurs. It's going to be created by small companies growing. But even if you're a large company, if you're one of those Godzillas referred this morning, you have to be lizard-friendly, and you have to be around the environment of small companies growing. I was talking last night with one young Mexican entrepreneur. he was sharing with me that Wired published his company being one of the first cloud computing companies in the world doing a cloud ERP with us, and that was very innovative back then. But having a company that has executives that see the environment and see that young entrepreneurs generating value, you have to be close to them and understand them and see the world as they see it in order to help them grow their companies and make your company stronger and even more competitive with the innovation and with all the new trends that they can provide to your company. Talking besides the direct competition, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, let me just add on to that, because we're talking a lot about big corporations, slow, methodical, maybe lethargic, bureaucratic. But let's realize that there's another side to that coin, which is that large corporations have a multinational presence. They're doing businesses in hundreds, in many cases, in hundreds of countries, dozens to hundreds of countries around the world. They have capital to invest, make acquisitions, do strategic partnerships, and be friendly to lizards. So I think if
They
you
can
culturally...
control the market just by that very fact.
Well, and you know, again, invest, you know, if you're a communications company or a content company, you can be out doing strategic deals. You can be, you know, you've got the capital, hundreds of millions to billions of dollars to bid for rights for content in the case of a content company. In the case of a communications, a mobile or a telecommunications company, you can get into cloud computing, and you can do it at scale, providing, so let's just say you decide you're Telefonica or you're BT and you want to be in the cloud computing business overnight, you know, relatively, you can do it, and you can do it and provide that service in 150 countries. Now, how many people can do that? So I think if you have courage and you're friendly to lizards, then I think you can do some really interesting things as a, you know, a large multinational that you just can't do otherwise. So there's some good that goes along with the big, you know, the big and bureaucratic reputation as well.
Very quickly, all due respect to Mike, we have to stop calling us lizards because we just got to the status of being cool.
Yeah. You want to keep it that. I know we have to go to questions. I mean, some questions here if we have time. But I'm just as a little anecdote. I made a film for I won't say the name, but it's the world's largest chip maker, and some pretty intelligent people and pretty hefty engineers who were brilliant. And they said, look, we need this right away because we've got a huge conference here in San Francisco. It's going to be a keynote thing and so on and so forth. And shot it in 2 days and turned it in 2 more. 6 months later, they were still arguing over, okay, how are we going to use this, and how are we going to? And it died. Everyone liked it, you know, within the core group. They're like, this is exactly what the message is. But because so many hands touched it, they couldn't get to where they really wanted to go. So that's, I guess, when I was talking about turning on a dime, that was the context that I was really talking about. And the question was, you know, whether you feel you can do that and whether you can beat off the competition or incorporate or bring in and attract new blood that would rather work for you, the established order, than start their own. And just lastly, quickly, is it hard to do that?
I think it's extremely hard to do that, but at the same time, it's something that everyone's aware of, at least in Televisa, and to find those. You know, we're talking about content in order to be able to react and be able to provide the right kind of content to the right marketplace, because the marketplace is changing. The young crowd, as I mentioned, is not watching linear television anymore. So the first time I saw this, the Gangnam Style, was my daughter showing it to me. You know, she's 9 years old, and from there it just went absolutely berserk. You know, so though that new paradigm causes us to react, and obviously causes us to go out and find that crowd that's not watching us and bring them into the company, so they can help us attract that crowd, which is one of the things I try to demonstrate with our video there, is that we're adapting our content and we're trying to stay ahead of that curve. And I think Televisa has been very, very successful at doing that.
Are you working on demand as well? I mean, because
Absolutely.
if there's a show I want to watch, I mean, I go to Hulu. I mean, I don't watch NBC, ABC, CBS.
Yeah. So all the properties I listed there, we didn't go through each one of them, but there's video on demand, subscription video on demand, and transactional video on demand services that we're involved in. that provide our content once it's either been broadcast on free-to-air or the paid television networks, or it's 100 produced for online, which we do also. All of that is available on demand through the web, and it just depends on the windows that we either are involved in or acquire other content to be involved with us.
Okay. Well, we've been lost in our conversation here, and we certainly want to open it up to some questions if people have questions out there. And I know Robin's got a microphone.
I made you run, Robin. Thank you very much. Well, I'm Ricardo from Fontacto. I have a question because what I understand is that, big companies are trying to ride the wave, to innovate from the inside. As Marcus said, they have to sell this innovation thing internally. And for example, I've seen that BritishTelecom has developed a level of cooperation. For example, they acquire Ribbit, they acquire Jaja. So my question is, from your perspective, what has to happen for that level of cooperation to happen in Mexico in the form of partnerships and acquisitions? Because, for example, I see that we have the movie industry here, we have Televisa, which is networks, and I have Celeste, which is a friend of mine, and she is like the Netflix for independent movies. So what has to happen in your perspective to fill this gap? Because there's a startup community that, big corporations are not startups, so I would like to hear more about that.
Well, I think it's a great question, and actually this morning we were talking about precisely that, collaboration, and how can we do things together and see the market together. But one thing that I have to go through before I go into collaboration is the customer. In terms of consuming entertainment, the way in which we see the customer is that it's evolving quite fast, and it's becoming a lot more sophisticated than it was. So now we have customers that are willing to see, of course, the big blockbusters and the big Hobbits and Spider-Mans in the big screen, probably in an IMAX screen. But besides that, you have a lot of consumption patterns that are shifting and that are moving, and content that are willing to see in an iPad or in an iPhone that will never touch a theater screen, and that will go through all the different routes that are out there. And talking about independent film and independent production, the key, or to us the key, is to find the right window and the right mean for that product to be consumed by the customer. So if there should be a lot of content out there and a lot of customers willing to see that content, but sometimes that stories are not lengthy enough, are not big enough to be part of a super production. So they have to look after the right channel to send that message and to share that story. I mean, that would be my take on the question.
So one of my personal responsibilities at Televisa is just that, to bring in sort of the young, unproven talent that goes on screen and behind the screen. So most of our Televisa produces annually about 70 to 80,000 hours of content. About 8,000 of those hours are produced for pay television only. That content, which includes mostly unproven talent on both sides of the screen, is one of our responsibilities. And if you look at what's happening in Televisa and the big shows and the big programs that you'd see on the broadcast networks, most of that talent came through our pay television networks. And that's exactly what we're doing, is bridging that gap and bringing those young producers and young talents to the screen, giving them an opportunity to get out there. We make a lot of mistakes, and those mistakes actually turn into home runs in many different aspects. So that's one of the things we're very proud of at Televisa.
Go ahead, sorry.
The answer to your question is very simple. You need corporations that are willing to do that, people that are willing to do it within the corporation, and you need to think about also, how it will benefit the corporation, because corporations, at the end of the day, are looking at the bottom line as well. So,
Anybody else? What does our time look like? We have a little more time. We can chat.
Sure, you can go 5 more minutes, and then we'll break for lunch.
Yeah, just going to what Televisa is doing now. I mean, when you've been there roughly a decade.
Correct.
Okay. So what changes have you seen in terms of content creation and expanding your market in that time, and how that business has changed? Because, let's see. So that was 2000. That was the first wave of the internet, when there was really some incursion. Cable incursion had already happened at that point. I'm sure you co-opted some of that. But what's happened in the last decade in terms of trying to move your business forward and expand your market?
Well, I mean, if you look at the way Televisa is divided today, where we were back then, 80% of Televisa's business was broadcasting and television services. Now it's about 45%. The other 55% is telecommunications, right? The cable, the triple play, now the quadruple play with the mobile venture Televisa's involved in. So that kind of stuff has been tremendous. We've also seen very big paradigm shifts in terms of our business model. So we look at a company like Sky, satellite services, very, very efficient way to distribute linear channels, extremely efficient. We went from about less than 1 million subs, maybe 700,000 subs in 2000, to now about 5 million subs. And that was done not by getting the customers that we already had and getting them to buy more services, but to find market niches that where people wanted to be involved in paid television, lower cost packages, et cetera, and that's happened throughout all of Televisa's telecom businesses, which is extremely interesting. It's a great way to grow obviously the top line, the bottom line, and be involved in those type of changes. So basically what I listed there is that those last 10 years have been tremendous for Televisa in terms of change, and that's all happened because of people in this room that have created new business models that Televisa has emulated and gotten involved with.
So Marcus, Wayra has been set up by Telefonica, a multinational corporation, huge. Are they listening to the people that you're funding, that you're supporting? What happens to those entrepreneurs?
Well, let me answer this one without the microphone.
Just between you and me.
They are listening.
No one's listening.
They are listening. I think that they need to listen even more. I mean, you have to understand
Thank you for that. Thank you, because we need to hear that. I mean,
it's a huge cultural change for such a large corporation, especially from a developed market to enter into emerging markets, and they have to listen to the market and they have to listen to the entrepreneurs, and it's a very big change. What I think is good about this process is that they are trying, and that in itself I think is very important. We were talking about changing the subject to something that's really related. Everybody's very worried about the change of government in Mexico, and if they're going to continue with the programs to continue to foster entrepreneurship, et cetera, that I believe Lorenza's team has been very good at. And the only thing that we can agree on today, and we were discussing, Celeste and I and other people yesterday, what we can agree on is that they're listening, or they're trying to listen. And that in itself is good news. The rest is about execution, like it is with startups. So,
Karen, from a British Telecom perspective, and having spent a lot of time in Mexico, how much influence does the outside world have on what's happening here in Mexico? I know Bruce talked about it a little bit in saying that Mexico sometimes is a little bit behind, but then it kind of gets that cultural influence within the tech world, and then it is able to speed up. But what do you see in terms of influences and then responses?
Yeah, I think one of the positives is that Mexico, like a lot of emerging countries, is just going to skip whole generations of old technologies, et cetera. So the classic example of this is mobile, and this is happening all over the world, where whole countries, Latin America, Mexico, and others, whole generations of people just skip straight on to having a mobile device, and even in some cases enabled smartphones as their first computing device. And what I think some of this, another one would be access to goods via the internet, being able to order and procure things, whether it's via Amazon, et cetera. This creates a leveling. This creates a growth of a middle class. This creates a whole lot of interesting dynamics in countries. And so I do believe Mexico is going to benefit from that. or is benefiting from that, no question about it. So that's kind of one view that I have. And you can see that really just in being in this country and in looking around and watching how everyone is enabled with a mobile device and what they do with it, et cetera. If you're a large incumbent vendor, like BT is around the world, or Telefonica or Televisa, et cetera, then you have to think about it from another perspective, which is how do you see these new technologies, new enabled ways people are communicating, doing business, doing commerce, and how do you take advantage of that, and how do you look at the existing businesses you're in, see where they might be cannibalized, and make sure that you are one step ahead of where these trends are going. And so I think there's kind of two ways you can look at that. And again, I put my hat on sometimes as a board member of a large multinational company that's looking at it from, okay, are these trends going to help or hurt our business? And then I look at it also from a perspective here today at this conference of sitting as a interested party here in Mexico, where do I think Mexico can take advantage of almost skipping over not having some of the infrastructure to, if you will, get rid of, just to be able to sort of jump into the next century.
Well, to follow that, then finally, this will be my last question to you all, but please feel free to jump in on it, is what effect, clearly there is some, of the BRIC countries. I'm hearing more and more that, why China when there's Mexico? Mexico is producing, aerospace. They're producing televisions. The tech thing is the New York Times the day before yesterday had a great article on it's no more narcotraficantes. It's now about business, and it's about a technical revolution that's going on here that could and is perhaps, if you look at the dollars, overtaking Brazil. What is the effect of the United States in terms of Mexico's future with regard to technology, and the multinationals? How do you deal with that because of the huge Latino population in the United States, which is becoming not only larger, has become larger, but politically stronger and a stronger economic force?
Well, for us, it's been a tremendous game changer. I mean, our involvement originally with Univision in the 60s, and now again our involvement with Univision in the United States. We lead a lot of the primetime slots. We beat all the U.S. networks with the content we produce, and that's because of the population changes in the United States. So clearly for us, not to say anything bad about the other countries throughout the world. I mean, obviously Mexico is where we're from, and Mexico is where we're based out of, but obviously we're involved in those type of business models throughout the world. So the U.S. has been a big game changer for us, and all of our involvement there with Univision. But that's the same thing we're doing on our pay networks throughout all of Latin America is being involved. And each country is dramatically different. I mean, you cannot say that Latin America is a region. You have to really look at it country by country. And each one has their own paradigm. Each one has their own cultural issues, and we have to deal with that.
Do you produce different programming for Chile than you do for Mexico, or is it one?
Yes, I wouldn't say we do co-produce in a lot of these countries. We actually even co-produce in China. But what we do a lot is that we purchase content from our partners in Latin America, and we broadcast those pan-regionally throughout our pay networks, and vice versa. So they buy our content and they broadcast locally. So that sort of cross-pollination of cultures and content really helps us out a lot.
Yes, we also see this positive trend of Mexico. We have been reading the news about how Mexico has been seeing in other markets, in other countries. We've just come back from this week from India, where the piece in The Economist that wrote like a supplement of Mexico with the government change has been read worldwide, and it's giving like a very positive fresh air into the Mexican business environment, and we believe that that's going to have a very relevant positive effect in investments in Mexico. Of course, technology should be having a lot of impact of that investment, and should be capturing that investment in Mexico. And we see our country as one with a very bright future for the next for the coming years, right?
Okay. I want to include anyone else who wants to be included. One last chance for any kind of questions that anyone might have. On that note, yeah, go ahead, please.
So, just quick, why not invest more in M&A than R&D? if innovations keeps happening outside the corporation, why not invest more and better resources in M&A than what you're doing in R&D?
In our case, we rather see the specific companies that deal with parts of our company to grow as we grow, and us focused in our core business, which is running movie theaters and providing entertainment to families, and not jumping into developing software or doing other tech parts of the company. We rather outsource those and see the companies that are working with us grow at the pace at which we grow, instead of buying those companies. Right? Was that your question? Why not?
Why are you not investing more in M&A?
Buying other companies?
Yeah, if they are being innovative.
Because they're not part of our core business, at least in our space.
I would just answer, and this is a generic answer, I'm not talking about it from a specific company's perspective, but I think it has a lot to depend on the kind of company and the kind of culture of that large corporation. Some companies are very, very good at acquisitions. Take Cisco, for example. They grow by acquisition. Some companies are not good at it. Their culture, the kind of company they buy and those acquisitions fail. Either the acquiring company doesn't get integrated very well, the people don't want to work for the acquiring company, et cetera. And I won't point to examples, but we can all come up with them, I'm sure. And so, I think that growing by acquisition, and acquisition is a key strategic talent to have if you're a multinational, but not all companies are good at it. And so I think when you see companies that are less ambitious or that slow down on their rate of M&A, it's typically because they're not very good at it. And so that doesn't mean they shouldn't get better at it, but typically that can be a reason. And again, point to the examples where you see companies do a really good job and learn some lessons there. I know that at a lot of the business schools and at Stanford and other universities, they teach courses on successful M&A integrations, such as Cisco and others, to students.
And one of the main reasons, Cesar, is that it also depends on the market. Growing by M&A, it's usually a thing about multiples in the stock market. And if you don't have a stock market like,
Currency.
say, a NASDAQ.
Yeah, if you don't have a
if you don't have a
currency.
stock market currency, then, for example, in Mexico, you buy a company, you don't grow your share value. So then you don't play that game. So you're playing a completely different game. It depends on the market, I would say.
And it depends on when in the market, too. Because, as was just articulated, you can go through periods of time when you want to do acquisitions as a large multinational, but your stock currency and your multiple currency doesn't allow you to because of the overinflated prices of startups. So this is also a dynamic. And then you have to wait for everything to crash, and then everything's cheap, and then companies go out and buy lots of stuff, and then it dies down. So don't always assume that it's because a large multinational is A, not intelligent, or B, doesn't want to do the M&A. Might be that things are price prohibitive.
So in the case of Televisa, I don't know the statistic, but I would say that Televisa is probably one of the top companies that has invested over the last few years in Latin America in terms of M&A and joint ventures. The amount, what we did with Univision in the United States, what we did with Usacell in Mexico, and all the cable operations, a tremendous amount of resources involved in that. But without, it's very important to note that at the same time, it's very important for us to invest in internal R&D, and we do that really with our content. So expanding those telecom distribution platforms was very important strategy for us, and one of the ways we did it was through acquisitions and joint ventures.
Is that difficult to do sometimes when you have two different cultures? In the U.S., it used to be that there was an East Coast tech culture and a West Coast tech culture, and every time an East Coast company bought a West Coast company, there was a culture war, and quite often you lost the very essence of the company that was acquired, and that was the people, because there was just a different style of movement, a different style of management, and a different lifestyle. It was suits against tennis shoes and T-shirts.
Yeah, so we have a mix of that at Televisa, and I think one of the reasons why we do the acquisitions is because obviously the synergies created with the rest of the properties in Televisa and the actual management team that Televisa brings with it will help not only integrate that company, but grow it further.
Okay. All right, I think we've gone to our limit here, and want to thank everybody here. It was great talking with you, and thank everybody else.